As usual, we will start with a prayer of gratitude, followed by a brief review of what is energy healing, followed by a review of what we talked about yesterday, and then we'll dive into today's healing work. I'm really excited to have everybody with me today, and I consider this a very, very interesting topic, and hopefully also a practical topic that gives us the perspectives and tools to apply energy healing in a much more successful and meaningful way. All right, here we go. Thank you to the source of creation for being everything, for being us, for being our ancestors. Thank you for being the bridge between the unmanifest, quality-less field of the source of creation, the home of all the laws of nature, all the way through to the physical, material level of expression. May we work concisely and efficiently. May I express those values of intelligence which are the most useful to everyone here. And may we all together create real value and be a source of genuine support and upliftment to ourselves and to others, to the whole world. May everyone here expand in their ability to confidently and successfully employ energy healing for the highest and best possible outcomes and the highest and best intentions. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being with me. All right. What is energy healing? Energy healing what is that energy healing? Energy healing is healing. It's healing through consciousness. It is healing with attention, because attention is consciousness. As attention flows, it represents and is the flow of the source of creation. It is that which is fundamental to all which is manifest. So attention flows. So we could say energy healing is the art of focusing attention. That's one way to look at it. How do we focus our attention? What we do in these energy healing webinars is we focus our attention on the process of focusing attention so that we upgrade our skill and understanding of that process. The better we understand it, the more resources we have available to utilize the amazing potential that resides at that source of creation for affecting positive evolutionary change and transformation at the surface. Good. So as a group, as a collective today, we're going to look at the causal field, which is that deepest, finest feeling, first layer of manifest self. And we're also looking at the mechanics of how that level of our being, which is the level from where we harness and apply the healing potential, our healing potential. So from that level, we're looking at that pure potential of consciousness to affect a positive and beneficial change. And we're taking a really nice, deep, detailed look at the mechanics of how that happens. Yesterday, I did some descriptions of this causal level, and also its relationship to the astral level, which is just the next layer up. And we did that because it's one thing to tune into that feeling level, but of creation, of self, of ourselves. But it's practical only when it results in something good. It actually results in change. I realized there are three aspects that we're looking at. This is kind of the review of yesterday, although, you know, when I review yesterday, I'm kind of like adding to it as well. But there are three aspects. There's the aspect of understanding the really fine abstract levels of creation. There's the aspect of integrating that understanding so that it is owned and possessed by the physiology and there's stability. And then there's the process of applying it. And that's where the rubber meets the road with energy healing or any other type of technology whatsoever is, you know, does it really yield the results? Does it yield the results? And I think that's probably needs to be our focus this morning and the most important focus here. Once we know that the two fundamentals, the other two, which are kind of foundational, are solid and set in. So the title is Amazing Manifestations of the Causal Field. And I thought it would be interesting to explore how these regions of the causal body I describe as like an ocean. This is review of yesterday. The causal body is like a big ocean and it's independent of space-time. So it's like as big as the universe and it's as old as the universe and it goes from the past to the future. We had some fun playing with time last night. I suggest you enjoy that if you weren't with me last night toward the end. We got to look at the causal structure which is responsible for time and start to move into that area because I realize this is a very important and vital area. It's the direction in which, from my perspective, energy healing is starting to move, is to gain greater mastery over time, among other things. Good stuff. Anyway, the causal field has this tide that runs through it. It has a fluctuation or a wave of focus of awareness that moves back and forth from the wholeness to the parts. And the parts are like malleable puzzle pieces. And some of them change a lot when it goes to the wholeness and back to the parts. Some of the parts, they're only there briefly. They're only there for one wave. But some of the parts stick around, and wave after wave of this oscillation of energy from the wholeness to the parts, the same parts tend to come together as a foundation for our own experience and understanding of reality. And we talked a little bit about the planets and how the planets tend to represent archetypal forms. And so these archetypes, we are gifted these archetypes in our human bodies, in our earthly existence, because these archetypes are ever-present manifestations of our environment. So they have a reality. The planets obviously have a physical reality, but we don't, because of the nature of our senses of perception and that we're taking in this little slice of creation, we're not really always noticing the planets from a physiological level all the time, right? Because they're great big things. They're way out there in outer space, in the space of our solar system. And it's not like my water bottle, my green water bottle. It's not like my water bottle. Like I see my water bottle every day. So my water bottle's like it's like a in my face kind of present part of my reality. The planets are like out there somewhere. And some people go through their entire lives under the influence of these massive bodies and don't even really give them a second thought, right? However, the planets do have their reality. They have their causal reality, and they hold space in the causal field. They hold space in the causal field. Just every one of us holds space in the causal field. And every relationship that we have holds space in the causal field. So the causal field is comprised of these these resonating spaces. And I use my water bottle as an example because there's this much water and there's this much space. And the causal spaces or realms are like this space. They're kind of like an unmanifest, it's kind of like an unmanifest space there. But when the vibration or the activity of consciousness, self-referring or folding on its nature, rises into the space, it produces form. So when I blow my air, I drank more of it, so I have a better, it's a better sound than it was last night. Last night the space was very small. Now the space is nice and big. You can hear. So the space hums or vibrates. Yeah, it hums or vibrates with the energy that emerges from the gap in the field of para-prakriti, unmanifest being. We're just lighting it up with our awareness. I'm focusing with you that the awareness goes right into that spot and looks at those exquisitely amazing mechanics where para-prakriti has this little oscillation that's running in the gap between being completely folded asleep on itself and being alert and awake to its own nature. And that little oscillation rises up like that, and it comes into the causal space, and the shape of the causal space determines the pitch. It determines the quality of that sound. And because the causal field is full of these resonating spaces, the resonations or the pitches that are produced in these spaces come together like the notes in a chord, like a symphony. They're like musical instruments in the orchestra. Each one has a different shape and a different quality, and that gives rise to variations in the sound that is produced by this vibration of consciousness moving into the space. The relationships between these pitches, the relationships between these vibrations, these relationships are moving forms, because as we know, a relationship sits between objects, right? So it's like a bridge, and it connects that. So it starts to create a kind of a movementy type of energy, which is actually the threads of the astral field, the threads that we experience, those threads of consciousness. When you think I'm going to the store, you're thinking I'm, and you're thinking store. And then there's a little wave of awareness that runs between you and the store. And even when you're in the car and you're not at the store yet, that thread of consciousness is the foundation upon which that movement takes place. You get to the store, you don't get to the park unless your stream of consciousness got corrupted or got off its mark, right? So the relationships are the threads. The relationships are the threads of the astral field. And the astral field, I also use the word web of life to describe, because it connects everything to everything. So that's basically the review of yesterday. There was one more point, I think a very important point, and that was that the web of life, the threads in the web of life are not straight. They are not straight. Nothing in nature is straight. Even if I let the water in my bottle settle down and make a pretty straight line right there, it's still not straight, because it's still conforming to the curvature of the earth. As small as that curvature, small in influence as that curvature has on the level of the water, it's still a curve. None of the threads are straight. What that means is we have a fabric that ripples. The astral field is a rippling fabric. And the curvature of the fabric in different directions acts a lot like a lens. We know a lens is a curved piece of glass that causes the light wave that comes into it to if it's like a prism, it causes it to refract and spread out, and you get to see the whole spectrum of expression from that single initial wave of intelligence, or that wave of light. In the case of light, it's a wave of light, and it hits the hits a piece of glass, and it refracts like that. It spreads out. And so the impulses of being or consciousness from the source of creation, when they hit that astral field, they spread out, and we get this spray of diversity at the surface level of creation, as long as the fabric is curved towards the relative. If the fabric curves the other direction, then that supports an inward flow of awareness. Right? Inward flow of awareness. And that's what we're doing in today's healing session, is we're curving the fabric back toward the deeper levels, the more abstract levels of self and of creation, so that we can take a deep, close look at this fundamental to the manifesting process. Because the initial shapes of the causal field are super important for the type and variety of manifestations that we get, for the type of light that ends up working its way out to the surface. All right. That was the review of yesterday. There were also lots of healings in and between all the points of knowledge, including a big healing for ancestors, transformations for the heart, upgrades of perceptual ability, so that we can clearly, as a collective, and I'm reviewing that one for everyone now, just doing a little bit of review for everyone, anyone who wasn't with me last night, to increase, looks like increased stability in the solar plexus, in order to support the focus of awareness in such a way as to comfortably, safely fathom the finest levels of creation without any corruption or imbalance creeping in. Beautiful, beautiful. Lots of protection for everyone. And the protection initially comes from the goodness, the inherent goodness in the that initial wave that sits in that gap between unmanifest being folded in on itself and unmanifest being awake. There's an inherent goodness there, an adorableness. And we made correlations between the different structures and archetypal forms in the different parts of the body, and correlations between these causal structures, and this is very important, correlations between these abstract causal structures and our actual physiologies. And the reason that's so important is every other system that I know of that utilizes or that has a model for understanding the causal regions, every one of them describes these causal regions in terms of beings which are separate from oneself. And I'm not offering that to you. I'm not offering that. The reason is that nothing is outside yourself. It's all the self. It's all the self. It's all yourself. What you see, what we extract out of our little, each person has their subjective reality, right? It's like a little slice of absolute truth, our little subjective truths, or a little slice of absolute truth. And everything that we find in that slice is a reflection of oneself. If you find something nasty, just to say, because it's important to know what you do if you find something nasty, understand that anything that creates a reaction in you of, like recoiling or angry or fearful or uncomfortable, is an indication that there is a potential for some wonderful transformation right there on that spot. And what we want to do in energy healing is we want to catch those spots where there's kind of a pressure, this pressure that's created by the inconsistent alignment of personal subjective truth with absolute truth. Okay, so there's absolute truth and there's nothing we can do about that. That just is what it is. And God bless that. And ideally, our personal subjective truth is perfectly aligned with absolute truth. But because we're functioning from the perspective of the human nervous system and the human senses of perception, everything processed through the human brain, which is wired just so, what happens is subjective truth almost always ends up being a little bit incomplete in relationship to absolute truth. Always. So those spots where the incompletion, like the forefront, the point of most lively incompletion, will become a point of pressure inside the being. If we catch the pressure early, if we watch for the pressure, we want to evolve the sensibility, the sense of perception, the fine sensitivity to identify those spots where that pressure is being created. At any given moment, it's always going to be created somewhere. At any given moment, our subjective truth will be slightly having the potential to expand more into absolute truth. So we want to find those spots and we want to leverage the potential transformation, the transformation potential in those spots before it becomes a problem. If we wait and we ignore it, then the pressure builds up and the pressure eventually erupts at the surface as imbalance or incompletion or some situation which is difficult. This is about using energy healing in a practical manner. So I'm focusing my awareness right now to identify the energy signature of those edges, where personal subjective truth has yet to reach the potential of absolute truth. And again, I'm feeling there's something that sits at the solar plexus area. There's some feeling of, oh, I was wrong. The feeling, I made a mistake. So the feeling of that I was wrong and I made a mistake, that is like a little discordant feeling that's clustered around that spot. When discordant feelings cluster around the spot, they stop awareness from penetrating because they're uncomfortable. Discordant feelings are uncomfortable, so they don't want to go there and look at that. But discordant feelings are actually the manifestation of the energy required to promote the change. When something, it's like these lovely rocks over here, they tend to stay put. Unless something big comes along and pushes them, right? So it's the same for us that in general, the inner organization of self tends to stay about the same unless something comes to push it. And those discordant feelings are full of energy. They're full of force, life force. And so when I say there's an energy signature for that area of that bridge or that connection between personal subjective truth and absolute truth, I'm really describing a causal structure. Yesterday, I talked a little bit about causal structures in terms of forms that seem human-ish, humanoid, like ascended masters and angels and, beings, the gods. We talked about Ganesh, we talked about Lord Kalabhairava, we talked about different forms like that. But there are many forms. In the causal field that are less humanesque. So I thought it were humanoid or something less human-ish. And I thought it would be really important that we touch on those as well. And you guys can see we're just skimming the surface here. There's so much There's so much information. So other types of causal forms include regions. They include structures that are like energy signatures of specific things, such as the energy signature that resides at the point of that junction point between personal subjective truth and absolute truth. There's an energy signature, and that energy signature is an archetypal form. It's something that's very similarly experienced from one physiology to the next. So by identifying it in one's own self, it's also, and shining the light, we bend, let's see, we bend the astral field like this so that intelligence from being is coming up, it's hitting that and it's bending back in toward the causal field and taking a look at that particular energy signature, which sits in that junction between subjective and absolute truth. The technology that I offered forward yesterday was any time we're dealing with any causal structure, we are addressing it with reverent love. Why? Because it is our body. We treat our bodies with respect, lovingly, right? We take those actions that are supportive of the body. The causal body is the body. And all the forms are born of the potential to support evolution. So when we treat the body with reverent love, with respect, in a devoted and loving manner, then those forms are fed with our love, and they're fed with the energies that they need to fulfill their potential. They're fed with the energy they need to fulfill their potential, right? All of them, even whether they're humanish or whether they're like a room in a house, space-ish, or whether they're of some other type or variety of causal structure, like an energy signature. We need very much to talk about other types of animate forms that are also like not humanish. Very important. We're coming to that. But I just want to make sure that we've addressed the relationship between subjective and objective truth sufficiently. And I couldn't wait, you guys. I was waiting for like the last 2 or 3 weeks when I came across this piece of information to be with you now and to share it with you now, because it's our collective that has the ability to shine a brightness of light, a power of light into these areas, far more intense and far more expansive and broad-based than anything Dorothy shines in on her own. I love you guys. This is a powerful thing we do together. This junction point between subjective and objective truth is our key. It's like a golden key to absolute wisdom and absolute knowledge and access to that pillar of Dharma, right? Truth is one of the great pillars of Dharma. Our access to embodying Dharma at every single point of our being. So it's not just like the person's going down the street thinking, well, I want to be in my Dharma, but it's like every cell, every atom, every nuance of self is soaking in that truth, so that it's not like I want to be in my Dharma, it's just I am Dharma. Just that download for everyone. I am in my Dharma. You are in your Dharma. We are in our Dharma. Solid. Dharma. Dharma is also. Dharma and truth, pure truth is also. These are causal body forms. The changes that I'm seeing in everyone's physiology are running between the heart area and the gut area. right through that solar plexus chakra, which is the one that we're working with primarily today. I wouldn't have guessed. I don't even attempt to guess anymore. Y'all are structuring the whole thing, and I am grateful. I am grateful. And the reverent love can move from the heart area down into the gut area and through the whole torso, where we process so much information, so many facts and points of expression, of being in the relative, are processed down in the gut area, in the stomach area. I'm still seeing lodged in a lot of people's physiologies something there in the solar plexus area, and I feel that it is an energy that tends to activate the sympathetic nervous system. It's definitely a kind of really intense energy that feels kind of like yes, like fear, like a little bit like those butterflies in the stomach, you know, if you have a heavy crush, or just a very kind of aggravated, kind of an anxious energy. That, you know, fear is part of it, anxiousness is part of it. Dread is in there. So, and the dread, okay, is connected to sinister force, which is a term, it's a pretty heavy term, but that's a term that I used to use a long time ago, to describe an unhealthy relationship between the individuality of people and the exploitative energies that reside in the web of life, that reside in the field around us. And I'm sure those exploitative energies have roots in the causal field as well. I suppose as humans, it is our responsibility to not overlook those energies, because they are part of that landscape, and we will not be able to rise into our power and our potential as beings of light without also mastering the relationship with those energies. It doesn't mean all the traditional ways it's been done in the past, because those don't work. Those, humanity over thousands of years has proven that the ways that these energies have been handled in the past simply don't work. They will cause self-destruction. So it has to be a new approach. It has to be a solid approach that is upheld by the potential of pure being to promote absolutely the highest and best evolution out of every situation. This is so important. This is so important. Being upholds our relationship with every structure in creation to integrate with highest evolution, progress, and not just personal progress, but progress that takes place at every level of creation. It has to be good for us. It has to be good for everybody else. It has to be good from the subtle levels of creation. It has to be good at the gross levels of creation. It doesn't matter if the energy, if we perceive through our slice of subjective reality that some energy is kind of dense or dark, or it creates a kind of a fear reaction in the self. We will interact with energies like that. Like, that's part of human life, man. We live in a world of boundaries, and boundaries will create these reactions. But we handle ourselves in a way which disallows those boundaries to have a deleterious effect. We handle consciousness in such a way that even those energies promote evolution. They promote all blessings, all good, all benefit to everyone, without a shadow, without a question, without any side effects. You guys are powerful. I was not expecting to go here in today's session. I was not expecting that. But it shows not only the power of our group, but also the purity of intention. So thank you all for holding fast to that value of purity. What's happening right now at the causal level is that junction between subjective truth and absolute truth has been activated and enlivened, and it's supporting an expansion of subjective truth. And as that expansion occurs, it is infused with purity, innocence. Absolutely the most amazing, concise alignment with the intention of the entire creation to evolve. So it's not just personal evolutionary intention, but it's cosmic evolutionary intention. And even past that, even because you can get bigger and bigger, you can get bigger and bigger groups, or you could say organized collectives that have intention, right? When we're talking about subjective truth and objective truth, you can get, that's why sometimes people move together as a collective with an intention, with the idea that, well, maybe if we all agree on this one thing, that will make it right. Like, not to bring in too dark of an example, but, like maybe a bunch of people that are in a bar and they're all agreeing that drinking alcohol is just the best thing ever, right? And they all agree, like not a single person in the bar disagrees. So they can all feel like, yeah, it really is the best thing ever. But that doesn't make it the best thing ever, right? Because the absolute truth is bigger than that. And so what's happening, I'm just bringing that as an example, but what's happening here as we're aligning with cosmic intention for evolution is I'm seeing these cycles and these circles, bigger and bigger and bigger circles of cosmic intention for evolution spiraling out. And as they spiral out at higher and higher levels, the higher they go, the closer that intention comes to absolute intention for highest evolution. And so our healing, as we were putting our attention on the junction between subjective truth and absolute truth, has now enlivened that junction, not only at a personal level for each of us and at a collective level for our whole healing webinar, but it's spiraled out and it's enlivened that connection all the way out to the cosmic regions of creation to find that point where it's no longer a junction, where the union is all that exists. And what I'm seeing is it's like infinity. When it gets to infinity, when it spirals out to infinity, it's like the Fibonacci series trying to reach the golden ratio, right? With each pair of numbers, the ratio between those numbers gets closer to the golden ratio, but it goes to infinity, it goes to infinity, it goes to infinity, and it getting ever closer to that form. In our human bodies, I'm just asking being now, just asking being, in our human bodies, how close can we get? How unified can these forms become with absolute intention for evolution? It's a beautiful thing to put our attention on. Absolute intention for evolution. Absolute evolution is itself also a form of the causal field. Now we're starting to explore areas I had no idea we would be going. And I knew my husband and I, we were nerds. We were watching a movie about the Cambrian period of geological history of the Earth, and amazed to discover the intense biodiversity that was on Earth at that time. Far, far more biodiversity than there is on Earth at this time. Biodiversity has actually decreased over the millions of years. Cambrian period was about 550 million years ago, so like about half a billion years ago. And the forms were fantastic. They're places where the shale has been explored, and beings like you can't imagine, crazy wild beings with like 5 eyes and wild appendages and just stuff like we don't have here on Earth. And our causal field is a little bit like that. It's a field where the limitations of form are so unrestricted that all types of forms evolve. But of them, and this now comes into this thing that I was thinking I really wanted to explore with you guys. Of those forms in the Precambrian period, there's one form they discovered that was like a funny little worm thing that had like a little spine in it. And it had like a little tail that was shaped like a shovel or something, like a spade. So funny little thing. But they said in this geological documentary that this creature with a spine is likely to be the creature from where all of vertebrates evolved, because it's the earliest vertebrate ever found. So it's like our great grandfather. So why is this important? Because when we look at the causal field with its regions, its humming vibratory spaces, and we look at how the relationships between those give rise to forms that are like snake-like forms. There were lots and lots and lots of little worm-like, snake-like forms back in the Precambrian period. These forms that we think of now as the archetypal dragon, are really important, because the dragon is comprised of a head and a tail. And the head and the tail are the byproduct of the reflection of awareness up through the relative and then back down again, because it gives a chance for the astral field to run its course with the energies of being. The head and the tail. And it is this inward and outward stroke of the wave of creation, which is responsible for all things manifest. This is the point I was saying, the third point, like, how do we make this practical? Like, how do we connect it with reality? Whatever we are experiencing in the present moment that's driving the timeline into the future is the head, and the past is the tail. And it's from the head where the senses of perception are that we are able to fathom all the layers of creation and formulate an approach that produces the highest and best possible effect. The wisdom that is attributed to dragons is that wisdom. It's the wisdom of being able to look at the whole system from the present moment. We did a whole healing, by the way, for the present moment in the last webinar. Check that out. It was very cool. But from the present moment, there's the energy that opens the timelines forward, and there's the energy that opens the timelines to the past. And again, like a light coming through a prism, it's like a spectrum that opens out. And the head of the dragon is the point. The head of that process is the point that allows the system to loop around and come back to source and stabilize in wholeness which is the foundation for success. Wholeness is the foundation for success. Right. Right. I see it lighting up. I see people getting it. I see people getting it. We're putting these pieces together. You are so good. You are so good. This area between the heart and the gut is clearing out. It's all clearing out. I know, lots of good stabilization. Stabilization for those. Yes. So dragons. I said to my daughter when she was little, I said, you know, you can create anything out of consciousness. She said, Mom, I think you're lying to me, because if I could, I would already have a dragon. Little sweetheart. But I realized that that concept is so compelling. It's so powerful because it is fundamental to the manifestation process. The integration of wisdom into the flow of consciousness from being up to the surface and then curving back around again. Remember, the dragon, one of the archetypal forms of the dragon is the dragon swallowing its own tail, right? So the dragon is creating a kind of a spiral that loops both in and out at the same time. Like a Mobius strip? No, not quite like a Mobius strip, but there are forms, there are geometrical forms that cannot supposedly exist in our three-dimensional field, but that do exist mathematically. And that's one of them, is a form that like itself folds on itself and then it reemerges from itself like that. And it expresses that principle from Vedic science, folding back on myself. I create again and again. This is the dragon. You can own a dragon. You can own many. And I looked at them. This morning I was looking at them and I noticed that they come in all dimensions. We talked about dimensions yesterday, and I mean sizes or scales. They come in scales. They're big ones and small ones. And to be a dragon tamer, the alignment of subjective truth needs to be so close to absolute truth that one is able to harness that potential of being to produce only the most beneficial and positive effect, has to harness that at an ever larger and larger scale, right? We have to be closer and closer and closer to absolute truth in order to harness larger and larger forms in the causal and astral levels of creation that are responsible for the manifestation process. So we're looping back to the principle of the alignment of subjective truth with absolute truth. I feel as if this is a golden key, this connection between absolute and subjective truth, because it's the point where the potential of all the resonating spaces in the causal field to function together harmoniously, it's the point that is responsible for that harmony in the causal field to be at maximum value. There are two, I just barely touched on this yesterday, there are two different generally we can divide to two different qualities at the causal field. We can divide into dissonant resonation relationships and consonant resonation relationships. Dissonant means it doesn't sound good to the ear, and consonant means it sounds beautiful. And this division between dissonant and consonant is also responsible for the difference between laws of nature or structures, which we think of as dense or dark or not life-supporting, versus structures that we think of as light and sweet and life-supporting. This is the relationship. right here. But the beauty, because music is a divine gift. And what we understand of music is that any dissonant sound vibration can be resolved. And the resolution is only beautiful by virtue of the fact that the previous relationship was dissonant. If the previous relationship hadn't been there and you just play, you know, do, mi, so, mi, do. It's nice, but it's just boring. But right? It's only if you have those other harmonies behind it that create a little bit of pressure, then the resolution can occur. So this is what we're doing with the negative energies as they come up, as you experience them, as you find yourself facing situations and circumstances which are not the easiest. Understand that the foundation, the establishment with the source of creation gives us the freedom to transmute those more dissonant or dark energies into a value which brings new life. It renews. When we come back to the cadence at the end of a song, when we come back to the tonic chord, this all fancy musical lingo there, when we come back home at the end after a journey through all kinds of rocky landscapes, what we find is a feeling of being renewed and reborn and rebuilt, reestablished in wholeness, closer. Our subjective truth has become closer to absolute truth. This is the reason we live. This is the reason divine being has created this whole relative field of creation, which is not easy for divine being. If it were easy, it would be like that do, mi, so chord. It would be boring. If it were easy, it would be boring. So it has to be, existence has to be interesting for divinity. It can't be boring. It has to be interesting for the divine, for the source of creation to experience itself as us, through us. But in order to challenge wholeness, in order to challenge the divine, that means the challenges that we're facing are like way big. They're way bigger than us, right? They're like a lot of the challenges that we face as people, the really difficult challenges that people face are often shared among generations, right? Parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, we've all been working on some of these issues. And one of the big issues that we've been working on for literally thousands of years has been the issue of humanity exploited a bit and held down by energies which, by some forms of creation, which tend to gain a lot of benefit from the most subtle productions of our beings and our physiologies. The spontaneous, gentle, innocent, tender expressions of ourself, which we tend to ignore because they sit down at those fine levels of creation. So it's like, well, the humans are ignoring them anyway, so we can just, we can make this energy can go out into the creation and can be made use of in some other manner. But the problem is that in order to sustain or maintain that, because everything in creation wants to sustain itself, it's been necessary to keep humans ignorant. What we are doing in this healing session is we are throwing off our ignorance. We are letting off the cloak of ignorance and going into the detailed understanding of the areas of our being that are so cherished, that are so adorable, that are so precious and so powerful and useful, and turning our ability to utilize those energies and that potential for ourselves instead of allowing them to be blown away, blown out of our systems. It doesn't mean that we don't still serve humanity, and it doesn't mean that we don't still serve the creation. We do, but we do it in a more intelligent manner. We do it in a more intentional manner. humanity is brilliant. It's tremendous creativity. What we can do with these energies is directly applicable to our world now. So it's important. Otherwise, if we don't successfully do this, our world now could have problems. Let's just put it that way. I think you all know what I mean. So thank you for being with me for this. I am seeing a integration of our group. I'm feeling our group coming closer like that. And as we come closer, we're like the different points in the Fibonacci series that are so many, many, many of us coming together in a more concise manner and supporting all of our ability to connect our personal subjective truth with absolute truth. So that's really beautiful. And I see that it's just gelling and it's gelling. It's very important that we did that healing for everyone feeling really safe, feeling really protected, knowing that when we're working at the very finest levels of our own being, we are naturally protected. We are naturally in a safer, more powerful, more comfortable, more sacred space than when we're being jerked around on the surface of reality without the connection to our deeper capabilities. So that's increasing, that sense, that feeling. And what we're doing is we're creating a sacred space. Our healing collective is creating a sacred space. We're literally creating a new space, a new life form, a new form of the causal field that is like, it's like a holy space for all of humanity. It is a structure, an archetypal structure of essentially like home. Although home isn't always safe for everybody. Even little children, if they grow up in a dysfunctional home isn't safe. So it's a different type of home. This is like an archetypal home space, which is so safe, which is so protected, which is so well established, well linked. I'm seeing multiple, it's very interesting. It's like the web of life is curving this way, and it's creating the light has come up to the surface, it's coming back through, and it's refracting like that and going down into the absolute many, many, many layers. It's like when our brains rewire and we start to create more neural pathways, like from a single area, single neuron, brain cell starts to get more connections with the other ones around it, and more blood flow starts coming in like that. It's like that. It's creating a form like that that's filled with the support of the laws of nature. Yes.
Somehow related to Dharma and the 4 legs of Dharma.
Yeah, thank you. The question is it related to Dharma and the 4 legs of Dharma stabilizing? And absolutely correct. Because Dharma is that protective function. The more we're established with absolute truth, the more we are aligned with Dharma. It's key. It's an absolute, it really is a key. Because any non-establishment with that truth is going to create the pressure, and the pressure is going to give rise, if we don't attend to it, it's going to give rise to problems. And that means, health and financial and relationship and whatever. So right there, yes, thank you. In fact, a Dharma matrix can plant in the Brahmastan of that space. Beautiful. So we have the space, and the Dharma matrix is in the center, and the Dharma matrix is connected to source. And it's stable, and it's very precious, and it's very interesting. It's a very personal confession. I have a very personal confession. Before the webinars, I frequently dream that I'm feeding a lot of people. I used to be a cook. I used to be a baker, and I make big cakes for everyone. But I frequently dream that I'm hosting a feast, And last night I dreamed I was hosting a feast, as usual. And I realized that the only way I could feed everyone is if we all hosted the feast together. And so here we are, Here we are with the thickness of the present moment timeline, tying together the past and the future, because what we're doing right now is for the future. It's opening the timeline out in front of us to manifest a path forward, which will be at a much higher level, much more efficient progress toward the goal than anything we've done before. Just seeing the feast. Just seeing the feast. The space can accommodate billions of people. It can accommodate billions of people. So we are creating it now. And it has the blessings of the Mother of Creation. It has the blessings of all those resonant, harmonious, causal forms. They're all part. They all have like a kind of a contribution or relationship. It's like I said, oh, we're creating a new form at the causal level, but it's like having a classroom and a new kid comes to join the classroom. Well, the other kids have to switch their desks around just a little bit to accommodate the new desk coming in, right? It's the same thing. And what's happening is the causal field has been so enriched by the healing work that we've done today, and so enlivened that as we create this new space, the entire collective of the causal field, the entire family of resonating spaces are blessing this new space. They're blessing it. They're embracing it and supporting it and working together to enjoy the higher level of harmony that's produced by this space added to all the others. And what this space does is it provides a direct context for anyone, anywhere, for all of humanity to integrate with their own truth, their own subjective truth, down at that causal and astral level, to understand the nature of that area of the physiology, to illuminate it, to utilize it, to integrate their experiences with that level of themselves, and to really own the full range of their human potential. We're just setting the condition. That's all the space is. It sets the condition. It creates a resonation which is accepted in the context of the entire creation, that will allow humanity to move with grace into its next step or its next phase of expression. That's huge. It's huge. It's huge. It's like a seed. It's like a baby thing, so we don't realize. When the baby thing comes out, you don't always realize how amazing. But really, I want to take some questions. As you talk about the dragon in very positive terms, I wonder how that fits with the Christian story of Archangel Michael slaying the dragon. Thoughts? Yes, there's that Christian story, and there's also another Christian story about the snake in the garden, right? Which is also, again, the head and the tail and the bit in between. The point here is that Archangel Michael, and I'm glad you brought up Archangel Michael, because archangels are definitely causal structures. They are forms in the causal region which are held collectively. So, like, anyway, my example of the drunks in the bar it's such a low frequency, but anyway, like the drunks in the bar, you know, in religions, and I talked more about religions yesterday, that the nature of religions is for individuals to come together as a collective and to collectively agree that there are certain structures that they're working with, that they accept and that they do access within themselves, which have an effect on the relative level of creation for them. So, yeah. The archangels, and those are forms of the causal field that have specific features and characteristics that are accepted by particular religious groups and allow those individuals to access that particular slice of the potential of their astral field. What Archangel Michael is doing, and Archangel Michael, as we know, is seen as a kind of a fierce archangel. One of the things that sets archangels apart from regular angels is that regular angels, if we have a spectrum, we've got our spectrum from dense to subtle here, right? So dense up here, subtle down here. We've got another spectrum from, or polarities of like dark, negative, icky, to light and positive and blissful and beautiful. And so the angels are sitting down at the causal level, and the demons are sitting down at the causal level. And their range along the spectrum of dense to subtle is very small. They don't go that high. They're just like close. They're close to the absolute. And because of that, their range on the spectrum this way is also very small. Right? So the angels, they just stay over here in the sweet, soft, pretty, happy area. It's like having that tonic chord, do, mi, so. It's just do, mi, so all the time. You don't get those more complex jazzy chords don't factor in over at this area of creation much. And then the demonic energies down at the other end of the spectrum, they're close to the absolute. That's why we tend to think of them as oh so powerful, because they're very abstract, and any influence created at the abstract level can have a very big effect at the surface. But compared to humans, we are so big. We are from here to here. We are so big. And we are not just from here to here. We are the whole spectrum. So human existence is coveted. It is attractive to all beings because we have these physiologies allow us a slice of truth, a slice of understanding of reality, which is very large, even compared to angels, even compared to demons. So the dragon, Archangel Michael slays the dragon. Archangels are bigger than angels. They're larger. They represent larger regions of the causal field. And as a result, archangels are able to interface with negative energies as well. That's why they're often called upon in more difficult situations. Angels are very sweet. We call upon our angel self, our future selves as angels. We call upon when we need a shot of compassion, when we need a perspective that will allow us to gain some wisdom, when we need some mastery over the natural laws, which are creative natural laws, to help structure something important that we have coming up. But we call upon archangels, or I would say access those particular regions, those larger regions of the causal field, when we need to deal with negativity. So Archangel Michael is seen as fierce. I think he's traditionally pictured with a sword, and he's the protector. And archangels are also seen as physically larger, right? That's part of the tradition of understanding, is that archangels are great big angels. And they do interface with the negative aspects of creation. And in this case, this dragon, or this serpent, has a head and a tail. And essentially, Archangel Michael represents at that time, because the tail is there creating its trouble. So that's a particular, you could say it's part of a ripple of the astral field. It's coming up to the point where it's starting to ripple around, because that's what all those snake-like forms are, really the threads or streams of consciousness that are flowing through creation. And it's having somehow a deleterious effect. And so what Archangel Michael does is Archangel Michael forms the head, and the head is able to put the tail in line. So the slaying of the dragon isn't so much, it's symbolic, if you will. It's symbolic for the capability of the finer or higher levels of expression of consciousness, even humans at a high level of expression of consciousness, to master the negativity, to harness it and handle it in such a way that the end result is a resolution. The end result was that pressureful chord, and that became that beautiful, sweet coming home chord. That's what the slaying is. It's the completion of the loop, essentially. The flow of divine being folding in on its own nature produces everything in the manifest field. I hope that made sense. I hope you like that explanation. Not the traditional Christian explanation, I agree, but anyway, it is what it is. It fits, it fits. Here's another one from an anonymous attendee. One of the dream interpretations of dreaming about food is that food is knowledge, and you are definitely feeding us with your precious knowledge. Oh, thank you. And yes, the lady who asked the question about the dragon, yes, yes. So yes, this is I knew that. And I thank you for having the wisdom and honoring the dream process, because I think it's important that we actually look at this. We're coming to the end of our webinar, and this is really important, is that the knowledge that the area that we've been delving into in this webinar is very abstract. And we've been, most of us anyway, perhaps, in waking state of consciousness, exploring and looking at this information. And it's actually easier, much easier, to process process the experience of the resonations in the causal field from dream state. The relationships between them, the threads, as well as the actual resonations themselves, are very easily accessed from dream state. So this part of the webinar is focusing on a healing for the nervous system, for the, starting with the pineal gland, the Ajna chakra, and then extending out to the entire nervous system to support maximum activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, because part of that process is about healing, obviously. If we have access, greater access, and direct experience of these structures of creation, then it's much easier, of course, to harness and utilize them and to get them directed, aligning the direction with cosmic intention for evolution. See, scary things will be a lot less scary now because of the healing that we did today. Because we know that when we approach it, the way Archangel Michael approaches the dragon, that we understand that in order to get the tail of the dragon to stop slashing, we have to hold the head. We have to take charge of the head, and then the head controls the tail. What does that mean time-wise? It means the future controls the past. I know it's opposite of what we're used to thinking, but remember, our thinking about the future and the past is a byproduct of the linear experience of time in the condition of the human body. Time doesn't actually exist like that. Time is a wholeness, and the future is a greater state of evolution. So, of course, logically, clearly, at a higher state of evolution, we have the capability to affect the past. In the past, we don't have as much ability, right? The way we do it, I left everyone with this at the last. It's interesting, the end of this webinar is tying up, is harmoniously coordinating with the end of the last webinar. We ended with a big healing for time. And I believe I have a whole webinar on time coming up, which I'm really looking forward to because it's a very, very interesting topic. But the principle here is that the access to the potential of future is through the present moment. And the more completely and succinctly, the more totally aligned we are in the present with now, with the now moment, the more we are in this now, the thicker and more robust now becomes. And when now becomes full, all the way to infinitely full, then from this present now moment, we have access to all the past and all the future timelines. And there are a lot of them. There are a lot of them. And just like that range from more harmonious on one side, more orderly, more harmonious to more chaotic, more dense on the other side, or more dark, we could say, on the other side, sinister. So the timelines do that as well. The timelines, they spread out. They spread out like that spectrum coming through the prism. And the principle here is to access the timelines that are best aligned with absolute truth and cosmic evolution, intention for cosmic evolution from the perspective of the cosmic. What about relationship with devatas? If they are in our body, how can we sometimes feel so small? Good question. Yes, I just briefly touched on this at the beginning, that there is, I'm trying to think, scale, that if we think of dimension as scale, so they're bigger forms and smaller forms. Okay, so we know this wave is going through the causal field, from the wholeness of the causal field down to the parts. How grounded we are in how integrated consciousness is, how expanded and integrated and profound consciousness is, will determine how much awareness is able to fathom when the collapse of that wave comes down to its parts. So religions tend to offer, I really appreciate that we brought up this, you guys offered from California, this Christian concept, because religions offer forms of the causal field that run within a particular scale of the causal regions, right? So the regions that are all the way from the biggest of the big, right? The big God, the one God is like the whole thing, all the causal, all the relative, everything all wrapped up into one big wholeness. And then there are varying degrees. There's the Trinity, or the threefold condition of Mother Divine, or whichever religion you're in, it doesn't matter. There's the one becomes three, the three become five, the five multiplies out like that. The devatas in our body, those very small forms, which I also touched on yesterday, this is when awareness or consciousness is so well aligned with absolute truth that when the wave occurs from the wholeness down to the parts, awareness is able to follow it right down to the fine parts. Not just down to, larger forms like archangels, and there's just a handful. You can count them. There's so many archangels. There's so many ascended masters. There's so many of these sort of medium forms of the causal field. But when we talk dragons, we're talking all the way down to little teeny ones as well as big ones. And when we're talking devas, we're also talking the forms, the beneficent forms of the causal field, all the way from great big ones down to very fine ones. The reality is that the human sensory perception can perceive down to very, very fine levels, very fine. Research has shown that the human eye can perceive a single photon under the right conditions. It takes two, because the eye absorbs one of the photons, but it perceives one of them in the process. And so our ability to do this is with everyone. But it's dependent upon, one is this using time as I have described, and don't forget to watch the end of the last webinar because we'll go a little bit more in detail with that. Being in the present moment helps. It's very supportive of accessing more of the individual full potential. And the other thing is that you can access the devas in your physiology by focusing attention on the physiology. Every organ has its own energy signature. Every tissue has its own energy signature. The smaller ones are like, one man was describing me yesterday in a video, an email he sent. He said they remind him of pixies. They're like little fairy-like forms in the physiology. And I found that they absolutely adore and love the music of the spheres. They love the music. They love music. Those fine ones, they hum along. They like to whistle while they work. That I found that most often when I was working with the devas in my physiology and working to heal various tissues or organs, that almost always the mind would bring music. And that's when I realized, oh, they love music. Why? Because the heart center resonates with the feeling of the music, and the heart center is like the conductor of the orchestra of the body. Whatever feelings are being produced in the heart area are creating an effect in the magnetic field of the heart, and that magnetic field is dominating all the other magnetic fields produced by all the other organs. So to work best with your devata, the devata in your physiology, to keep them happy, love them with your heart, and check in. First, be in the present. These are the steps. Be in the present moment fully. And then check in with the heart and make sure that the impulse there is reverent love, because reverent love nurtures and feeds all these structures. It keeps that aspect of the physiology healthy. And then allow your attention to gently settle in to wherever it needs to go, and allow, to a certain degree, your body will help guide your attention. So if you let your attention move both as with intention, but also as a listener with a bit of innocence, the innocence that you carry along with the reverent love will help guide your attention into the specific tissues or the specific areas of the body that need that support. And you are so beautiful. You are so precious. Our bodies are so precious. They're so adorable. And the causal field is so adorable and so precious that allowing that quality to dominate through the experience will be very supportive of life. All right. Thank you for that amazing question. I really appreciate that. From Croatia. Croatia is such a beautiful, speaking of adorable, beautiful countries, amazing. So thank you everyone for being with me. Thank you to the Europeans. Thank you to the Americans and everybody. Oh, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. The first girl who arrived today is thanking me. You are so precious. I really appreciate it. So yes, everybody, I'm wishing everyone a wonderful 3 weeks until we meet again. Yes. And looking forward to our next big session. And each time we build on the previous. So I'm sure we're going into planetary influences of tremendous relief. It's going to be great. Oh, she said it was a great feast. Yay. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. Bye.